now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for October 14th. Well, here we are, down to 3 systems active at this point, with Kompasu, a tropical storm about to make landfall in Vietnam, Namtheun surviving as a tropical depression, and Pamela disintegrating as it continues to push further in Mexico. 81 storms have formed so far this year as we head into day 287 of 2021. It's day 136 of Atlantic hurricane season, and we have that area of interest still with a 10% chance of formation at this point. Very little development is expected before it does merge with the front later on. Other than that, nothing that we are watching in the next 5 days. In the Eastern Pacific, the only thing active here is Tropical Depression Pamela, which is probably going to become a remnant low within the next 6 to 12 hours at tops. But the remnant to this is going to produce some widespread moisture, especially across Texas, where several inches of rain could fall over the next 24 hours. In the Western Pacific, we have Kompasu and Namtheun. Kompasu, which of course peaked as a typhoon but has weakened over the Hainan Peninsula and will continue to weaken as soon as it makes landfall over Vietnam. Namtheun will likely weaken as well, maybe a little bit of a resurgence, but that isn't exactly completely known right now. There's also Invest 99A in the North Indian Ocean, but given the fact that it has failed to develop still and will continue to be in unfavorable conditions, a 0% chance is being assigned to that specific invest. Here are the track forecast for the next 84 hours, and due to the fact that Kompasu is not even going to be surviving that long, let alone 48, there's not really going to be a track forecast for tonight, but what you do need to know is that we do have it, or well, officials now have it, at 50 miles an hour, 991 millibars. Of course, the operational cyclone analyst team has been dissolved, so we are now sticking to using Foley officials on all real-time storm intensities in a better way to get our information out more reliably. Here is the Atlantic satellite imagery, and you can see what's going on here, and the really big thing to note really is that the remnants of Pamela have already begun to spread its moisture across Texas and parts of the southern plains, while an extratropical system that was responsible for severe weather and winter weather is pulling itself north-northeastwards. In the Eastern Pacific, you can see another view of Pamela making landfall. It did make landfall with winds of 75 miles an hour officially. There's really not much going on besides that at this time, so really nothing to be looking out for in the days ahead here. In the Western Pacific, you can see what is Kompasu, a very large system as it continues to push towards the west, and that blob that you see towards the right there is Namtheun, which has been doing okay at producing convection for sure. It's been flirting with tropical depression and tropical storm intensity at this point, so it wouldn't be too much of a surprise if it does regain that tropical storm status. Joint Typhoon Warning Center does expect that it will for a brief time. The North Indian Ocean, you can see that the monsoonal season is continuing as per usual, / the outflow that you can see from Kompasu there in the Bay of Bengal. Other than that, 99A is that blob you see in the Arabian Sea, and it's just continuing to produce convection that is pretty much displaced. In the Western Pacific, you can see what's going on again with that closer up look at Kompasu. We saw that landfall in the Hainan Peninsula, and we are about to see another landfall in Vietnam. Of course, heavy rainfall is the primary threat, but thankfully this will be dissipating quite fast once it does make that landfall. That brings us over to the sea surface temperatures at this point. The sea surface temperatures are around 27 to 29 throughout the majority of the basin. Baja California around 30, and that's where we saw Pamela just reach barely there. And in the Atlantic, we're still seeing those 27 to 29 degrees Celsius temperatures across the southern Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, as well as much of the main development region. And much of the areas that were upwelled by SAM have pretty much recovered at this point. Going on over into the North Indian Ocean, you can see that the temperatures continue to warm here. The 30 degrees Celsius temperatures now take up half of the Bay of Bengal, while the rest of the basin are pretty much around 27 to 29 degrees Celsius respectively. In the Western Pacific, we're still seeing more of those temperatures remain around 28 to 29. They have decreased, and those 30 degrees Celsius temperatures have receded southwards quite a bit over the last few days here. And of course, in the southern hemisphere, we are still looking at those relatively cool temperatures that will likely be changing as we enter the season in about a month and a half. Looking over into the sea surface temperature anomalies, you can really see how pronounced the La Nina is becoming at this point. Atlantic sea surface temperatures remaining above average, same thing with the Eastern Pacific. Central Pacific is really the only basin that is substantially below normal that actually does produce tropical cyclones in the rare times it does. That brings us over onto our On This Day. On this day in 1982, Typhoon Nancy, a small but powerful Category 4, was on approach to the northern Philippines, where it would later make a Category 3 landfall. There were also two other systems active, Bob 09, which would make landfall in India with the winds of around 50 to 60 miles an hour, and there was also Tropical Storm Sergio, which had just been named. It would eventually track westwards and not really do much as a tropical cyclone. Of course, our On This Day products are sponsored by Cyclone History. You can find their Twitter tag on the bottom bar below. Well, that brings us over to the next names. In the Atlantic, we're still looking out for Wanda before we start the auxiliary list, starting with Adria. In the Eastern Pacific, the next two names now are Rick and Sandra. And in the Central Pacific, Hone would be such a strange sight to see that who are we going to have to call? The Ghostbusters. Moving on into the Western Pacific, the next two names are Malo and Nayeto. And of course, in the North Indian Ocean, we are looking out for Jawad and Asani here. Moving on over to the Southern Hemisphere, the next two names in the Southwestern Indian Ocean are now Anna, followed by Betsy Ray. In the Australian region, we're looking out for Patty and Ruby. And in the South Pacific, we're looking out for Cody still. We'll be back for another Tropical Weather Bulletin tomorrow night. We'll see you then.